You are listening to the IoT For All Media Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IoT For All podcast on the IoT For All Media Network. I'm your host, Ryan Chacon, one of the co-creators of IoT For All. Now, before we jump into this episode, please don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or join our newsletter at iotforall.com/newsletter to catch all the newest episodes as soon as they come out. But before we get started, does your business waste hours searching for assets like equipment or vehicles and pay full-time employees just to manually enter location and status data? You can get real-time location and status updates for assets indoors and outdoors at the lowest cost possible with Leverage's end-to-end IoT solutions. To learn more, go to iotchangeseverything.com. That's iotchangeseverything.com. So, without further ado, please enjoy this episode of the IoT For All podcast. Welcome, Steve, to the IoT For All show. How are things going on your end?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well. I'm excited to have you. This conversation is going to be a good one. I wanted to start off by having you give a quick introduction about yourself to our audience, background, experience, anything you think would be valuable for our audience to know about who they're listening to.
Sure. My name is Steve. I'm the founder and the CTO of a company called SensorUp's. And then I'm also a professor in the Rogers Internet of Things Research Chair at the University of Calgary. So I do research in IoT for a long time. I author several international standards on how to interconnect the world's IoT data into a coherent system of systems. And this standard has been adopted around the world in Asia, in South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, European Union. So it's really have some global impact. I'm very happy about it. And I see opportunity to start a company, really show what's the best practice, how to build a, IoT system of systems, interconnect different systems together. So I started SensorUp's. And SensorUp's right now is backed by VC. We raised our Series A last year. Yeah, it's fun.
Okay. Congrats on that. I know it's a big step. So talk a little bit more about SensorUp's, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the founding of the company, kind of the opportunity you saw in the market, how you got into the space originally that led to SensorUp's being founded and kind of where you are now.
Sure. So actually, Internet of Things, or at the time we called Sensor Web, was my master thesis topic and PhD thesis topic, right? So it's from the research. We have very solid scientific grounding. So the idea is, instead of building siloed end-to-end, not interoperable system, we envision the real potential of IoT is how to combine different systems together into a coherent system, like today's web, right? Combine all different servers, internet documents, and then together into one system. So that's our vision. So I did research on that and then author several international standards. And then I found a business opportunity, which is some users, early adopters of IoT. So imagine who are the early adopters of IoT. So IoT is not new to them. Military, for example. Public safety, complex physical operations like energy companies, right? And they have this pain about how to combine different systems together because they need that visibility. And more importantly, they need that prediction. So before bad things are going to happen, before wait time is going to happen, and they want to know. So I saw a business opportunity. So I start my own company, and then I didn't know what I get myself into and my wife into. So in the first couple years, really is like professor try to be entrepreneurs, right? So it's really R&D driven. But one day, actually, a company talked to me. The company is called Lockheed Martin. So they have this problem, and I heard NATO have this problem. They want to combine different systems into one. They have many different sensors, as you can imagine. So, and they want to use a standard-based approach. And they found me. So they gave me a contract and then develop a prototype, and I get to keep the IP. So I was like, doing business is easy. That's a good customer.
Right.
And actually at the very, after that, the maybe 2 or 3 years is really incoming request, right? From, for example, NASA, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Lockheed Martin. So they really have this vision. They want to do this, right? So we help them. But the moment that transformed the company was 2018. So we joined a accelerator called the Creative Destruction Lab. So we have a very good technology, but a very bad business model. So, and then
it's usually one or the other, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, a math professor tried to start a company, great list of customers, but don't know how to do business. And then, so they put me in front of a whole bunch of investors. So after 15 minutes, somebody said, you know what, Steve, you have great technology. You need money. You need some business expertise. So I have that. So I raised my seed round in 15 minutes.
Yep. Wow.
That's fun.
Wow.
Yeah, but at the end, I learned actually, talk about entrepreneurship, right? So there's a big difference between technology and product. So in the past 2 to 3 years, it's really about we try to productize our technologies, make it repeatable, and then can be hardened, can be used by real customers, right? And right now, real customers.
Fantastic. So tell me about that journey you've kind of gone through over the last few years to make it into a product. Like, what have you all learned? What, and where are you now? And kind of what's the general offering to the market?
Okay, great. So we had technology. So the root is from how can we combine different systems into one to create that unique value. But as you know, all the audience, you might know, right? Most of IoT systems are vertical, right? Designed for a very specific application. Actually, for a good reason. Right. So what we in the past 2 years, we was like, okay, so who need to address this problem about the multiple system together? So they have to use that. Right. So definitely not smart home. Smart home is quite homogeneous. Right. Mm-hmm. So we in the past 2 or 3 years, we said for us, it's really like, okay, so what are the pain our customers really have, the acute pain? Right. So, for example, we have a product line is for first responders, public safety. To save lives, every second counts, and many different systems. So as a result, actually, they have this acute pain, right? Mm-hmm. We have the other customers is a rail. The category is rail. So they really actually it's interesting, right? The rail companies, they don't know where the rail cars are. They know the engines, but they don't know rail cars are. But the funny thing is, Amazon, they know, if you buy $10 stuff from Amazon, they know where $10 parcel is.
Yeah, right.
And they don't know rail cars are. Yeah. And because it's a multiple silo system, legacy systems, and geospatial data is messy. So we found, wow, we fit right in, right? So that's great. But recently, we found, we tried to address big problems, right? Recently, we found a problem fit us very, very well. So the filter for what we do is really like multiple systems, and people need to care about the data rather than just the system. So that means more mature in the IoT journey, but also location is very important. So we are from a geospatial background. So the things that distribute geographically or the things that moves around. So we found actually methane emissions or global climate change, we fit out right in. Because methane is one of the biggest problem for climate change now. Okay. Because methane is 20 times worse than CO2.
Gotcha. So how are they? So before you all got involved, how is kind of that space being monitored? Like were methane emissions being controlled, monitored, or attempted to be reduced? And then what did you all do to kind of help solve that?
Great question. The problem is they are not monitored. That's the biggest problem.
Oh, okay.
Whoa. So actually, they don't know what's going on.
Okay. Are there any standards or regulations out there of what because I mean, if they're not being monitored, that means are they just not following the rules, or is there no real rules in place where they just don't care? Okay.
No rules. So it's a byproduct of the production of oil and gas, right?
Gotcha.
There was no rule, but right now people try to start to figure out the problem. And the big companies, right, the responsible companies, they really on top of it. They try to do it, but again, it's very new. Okay. But recently, as all the, global climate change, we chat about, 40 degrees in the Rockies right now, right? We can feel it. Yep. And then also there are new regulations coming in. Okay. And there's, again, like IoT, they are sensors. They are capable to monitor methane right now, right? Mm-hmm. So there is a wild west. There are many, many different sensing systems and try to solve this problem, which is quantify the leaking. Okay, so as a result, it fit us quite well, which is multiple sensors, and they need to future-proof the system because there will be new sensors. They are not mature sensors, right? They have new sensors. And a real monitoring solution for methane. So imagine you have a operation, right? Oil and gas is a very big area. So you need to use satellite, drones, truck mounted with sensors and in-situ sensors. And at the end, you need a person to carry a camera to look at the leaks to accurately quantify that. So it in itself is a multiple sensor solution. It fit us very, very well. And the things that move around, right, like drones and trucks and people, it fit us very, very well. And also the other big part is there's a missing component is a methane emission data exchange standard.
Okay.
So right now, for example, my company is working with some major producers who are, making a new standard so that we can really, once we collect data, right, how do we aggregate them? So how do we share with the world? So that's the other missing component we are working on. So yeah, this is something we are, quite excited. And there's you know what, it's just doing good things. And there's urgent needs. And yeah, so we're very happy about that part.
That's fantastic. That sounds very exciting. One thing you mentioned through talking about the company was proprietary and kind of siloed IoT systems. And I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit more for our audience to better understand what that exactly means when you kind of say a siloed IoT system and why that's also often a challenge to work with, and maybe what organizations should be aiming for instead.
Okay. So if you look at it, right, so the typical journey for any IT systems, okay, like the web. At the very beginning, there are multiple systems. So proprietary network. The network talk to the nodes within the network, but they don't talk to others. Right. Right. And then there's internet because, they try to create a network effect, right, by interconnect different computers, right?
Right.
But again, internet just it's just the pipeline. It doesn't connect the data.
Sure.
And then there's the web. When web comes and web browser, and that means the information are connected. So we can mash up the information on the web and change the world totally. Right. So my vision about IoT, so at the very beginning in 2002, I started my master thesis is IoT will focus this route, this vision, okay, this similar journey. At the beginning, silo system for a good reason, right? For example, there's just so many networking protocols, just like internet, before internet, right? So many different networking protocols, right? And then different field for deploy the sensors have different challenges, hence different protocols. But at the end, when we have enough systems, right, and people are moving their thoughts from connectivity more like to the data itself. So when people are thinking about data itself, and then that'll be, it's not that important about, individual systems anymore, how to choose network protocols anymore. It's about how do I combine the same data from different systems together so I can have better visibility. For example, use methane as an example, right? What you care is emission, the rate of emission and the occurrence of emission. Do you really care about which sensor you use?
Right.
Not really.
No.
In order to quantify the data accurately, yes, you do need to know the sensor itself, but you focus more on the observed property, which is the data, right? The reason you are collecting data.
Right.
So that's where I believe the future, we have to get there. And you start to see, people are moving there, right? You start to see some convergence of different protocols or even platforms, right? AWS, IoT, this and that, right? MQTT as the, like universal transport protocols, right? So my work is really focusing on top of those, we are focusing on the data itself.
Okay.
And we are writing standards. For example, methane data exchange is a profile of an existing standard. We wrote a standard for ISO. It's called observations and measurement. Okay. So actually, I would argue for IoT, actually, the first part, you have sensors and actuators, right? So sensors give you the visibility, actuators allow you to change the world, right? And so the sensor part, actually, you don't really care about sensor. You care about the observations. Right. And for the actuator, you don't really care about which brand of the robot arm you are using or the AC you are using to reduce the temperature. What you care is the task it's performing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's our thesis. And of course, it has a very nice link into AI. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. One of the other topics you mentioned briefly, and I've seen kind of on your site, is around connected workers. And I'd love it if you could just dive in for a second and kind of explain what connected workers means to you all, why it's important, and also how you've seen COVID kind of impact IoT's application or importance in the connected worker space.
I can share a story. It's like I shared, right? We are at the beginning, early stage of our company, really much focusing on sensors and give it the visibility. And the user persona are typically the office workers. right?
Yeah.
You get the data together, knowing how much, the safety, knowing where the train cars are, how to dispatch them, this and that. But after COVID hit, I was locked in my basement. And then I was like, thank God, I'm blessed, so I can work and safely in my basement. But for those frontline workers, they don't get to enjoy the IoT, the collaboration tools we enjoy. And they use pen and paper, the binders, and out there, right?
Right.
So it made me think about it. Wait a second, I was working with firefighters, right? And we are empowering firefighters to be fully connected, fully protected, and fully aware, to have the situational awareness. And then even develop an AI so to warn them when this dangerous situation happens. But we never thought about actually every frontline worker needs that, right? Imagine, they can connect to this, the surrounding information from different IoT systems, the digital twin data for the site they are having. And then so it can really empower them to be more efficient and to protect them, because a lot of them are working in a dangerous environment, right? And we know that from first responders. So last year, we start to really harden our product line on the connected worker. So expand from the public safety, the military, to the the frontline workers. So the idea is really about we improve their productivity. Okay. They improve for example, reduce the unnecessary waiting time. They hate waiting time, right?
That's good.
Everybody hates waiting time. And the other one is job quality, which means allow them to do things right the first time. To help them to do that, right? This is the second part. But most important part for us, we very much focus on is job satisfaction. So we very much focus on user experience. How can we empower them with the IoT data, the situational awareness, so that they can become happy about their jobs rather than herding the cats, miscommunication, wait there for somebody to come to open the gate for them, those type of things, right? And that's a COVID story inspire us to really focus on that.
So did you have contact with a lot of kind of frontline workers and people in this space while you were kind of exploring different solutions that were available that would help do with, kind of what you've already been talking about?
Definitely. We need to work with them closely. So to make sure the user experience is great, right? So as a result, actually, we chose the methane emission as our beachhead market, because part of the, you might think about methane is a whole bunch of sensors, flying around this and that, or set up sensor distributedly, right? Actually, at the end of the day, to have the very accurate reading, you need to send frontline workers to the remote site, carry a camera, and then to do the quantification. So in itself is a connected worker play.
Right.
Okay. So we are very much focusing on that, how to empower them to do the leak detection and repair. So there's a term called LDAR. So how to empower them to do that. And then so empower them to closely or seamlessly working with the the office worker, the emission engineers, so that they can just do things more efficiently and safety is very important as well. And also the regulator, they also require the producers, the energy companies, to record, for example, the activities in those sites. So again, we don't want them to fill those forms. What did I do? Blah, blah, blah. The time entered, blah, blah. It's just automate. They arrive at the site, we record, they click arrive. The weather has been reported, precipitation reported, humidity reported, and then the activity will be automatically recorded because of GPS, right? And then when they finish, like I said, I'm finished, I'm done, bam, report generated for them.
Fantastic. That's awesome. Now, I wanted to take a step back and kind of talk a little bit more in a broad sense for our audience out there about just getting started on their IoT journey. Through your interactions with different companies and different industries, what have you seen, or I guess, what advice would you have for companies looking to get started on their IoT journey? How should they start? How should they be thinking about it? How should they be planning? What should they focus on? And as they're venturing down this path of deciding if and maybe how IoT can benefit their organization or the organization of their customers, perhaps?
Great question. And we help a lot of companies to go through this journey, right? So we are a data company or AI company. And so I always encourage my customers to think about data. Network is important. Yes. The power consumption, the edge processing is important. But at the end of the day is your data. But in addition to data, right? So there are two kinds of data. There's one is called observations, right? To give you the visibility. But then what you really want is prediction.
Right.
Is before bad things going to happen, you want to know. Before there is a heart attack on the first responders, they want to save them, right? Mm-hmm. And before there is a incident, right, for some oil and gas sites, right, and then you want to stop people to go there, so on and so forth. Or before in leak detection, right, before the leak's gonna happen, you want to dispatch troops to fix them. That's more important. So we have a framework. It's called AI and IoT Canvas.
Okay.
And it's based on a book, by the way. For anybody interested in reading, there's a book called Prediction Machines. Okay. So it's look at AI from a economy perspective or business perspective, right? So it's not for techies. And in itself, it has a AI canvas. So we add the IoT flavor to it. It's called AI and IoT canvas. So it basically what it does is it's a framework allow you to break down your workflows. For every business, you have the workflows, right?
Gotcha.
So break down the workflows into different tasks, and then you try to extract the prediction task out of it. Okay. And then try to see what's inputs required. The inputs basically from IoT, right? The sensors.
Sure.
And what AI to apply so that you can get that prediction. And you replace humans with AI to make that prediction. But eventually is you use that prediction to empower the human to make judgment.
Right.
Okay. So judgment, definition of judgment is the risk of not doing it.
Sure. Okay.
Let me give you an example. Leak detection repair for methane, right?
Yes.
So what are the inputs? The different methane sensors. So it's not only one, multiple. What's the prediction you want? You want to fix the leaks before they happen, right? Mm-hmm. The first step is monitoring, but we want to do better. So fix it before it leaks. Okay. And then that's prediction. Once you have the data, you run the AI models and then different models, and then you have that predictions and you present to the emission engineer. And the engineer make that judgment. Okay, how do I, because I have a limited time and budget, how do I dispatch my crews to fix them, to repair them, to monitor them so that I have the best, the lower the cost and stop the leaks. Okay.
Right.
And then you have because the IoT give you the continuous monitoring. So you have the outcomes, right? Once you have the tasks, right? You have a judgment, you deploy your tasks, and you have the outcomes, which is, do I really reduce my emission or not? Do I improve my safety records or not? And those will be fed back into the AI to make your next prediction better. Okay. And we use this framework. And then, so this is one prediction task, right? For this. But we just run the framework, right? Like Canvas, so you have different, the canvases, right? Mm-hmm, and then you identify which one will be most disruptive or transformative.
Okay. Right.
And the framework I told my customer is like, if you see a prediction task can really transform by AI and IoT, and you think about, what if my competitor have this? I'll be doomed.
Right.
They'll eat my lunch. That's your priority.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. We usually talk about it in the realm of the individual company. We don't always look at it from the competitor standpoint as more of it as, kind of that fear. So that makes a ton of sense. One last question I had for you. So when we think about starting an IoT journey, oftentimes a lot of companies have questions about the future proof of technology, since IoT has lots of different technologies involved, different components, and so forth. I wanted to kind of get a sense from you of when you're working with organizations, how do you answer that question on how future-proof an IoT solution is, as well as what type of kind of quick win ROIs do you focus on for companies to see the business impact early on, so they invest the time, the money, and the resources into scaling an IoT solution, which is kind of where everybody wins?
Okay, great question. So about future proof, right? So there's one thing. So this jet fighter is a snowbird. Yeah, it's a Canadian. There's an air show right now. So,
gotcha.
I got it. Okay, yeah. So for future proof, so not every organization needs future proof stuff. So who needs future proof, right? That's number one. So ask about what's my life cycle for my technology or the initiative, right? If I need future proof, and my typical recommendation is find something which is open standard, open source. Okay, open standard, not not necessarily open source, but open standard. So as a result, you see military, their life cycle for their stuff, right? The assets is like decades. So they need to depend on something last longer and not controlled by only one party. So try to use open standard, right? So Protocol MQTT, why is popular? It's open standard, right? If good implementations.
Yeah.
And so that's my recommendation, but it's more complicated than that, right? But that's a good place to start, right? But don't get locked in. So number 2, for the priorities, right? I think I kind of answered with the AI and IoT canvas framework, right? Mm-hmm. You have different canvases, right? You do this exercise, you break your workflows into tasks, and then you have different canvases. And then you start to build the priorities. So build the inventory first, and then prioritize them and review them regularly, right? So the other way to do it is like for the more mature companies or organizations, right? Oil and gas, energy, military, they already have many sensors, right? So build the inventory of inputs and go through this exercise about the IoT and AI canvases, right? And then, prioritize them, right? So in this case, which is very, very quick because you leverage your existing data rather than deploy the network, capital expenditure, this and that, right? So your data has more value than you know, actually. Typically, that's the case.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, this conversation has been fantastic. I appreciate the way you've broken down kind of everything we've talked about. It's great for our audience to kind of get insights from somebody with, incredible level of experience and expertise in this space. I mean, the fact that you started out through a thesis and have evolved it into a company is amazing. Raising money on the idea, the technology, just super impressive stuff. So thank you so much for your time. The last thing I wanted to ask you is if our audience wants to learn more, has questions, follow up, all that kind of good stuff, what's the best way to reach out?
So go to SensorUp.com. And then also, I think some of you guys might be interested in this IoT and AI canvas. Reach out to us. We can go over it with you and help you to do the journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for your time. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. Thanks again for joining us this week on the IoT For All podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave us a rating or review and be sure to subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you're listening to us on. Also, if you have a guest you'd like to see on the show, please drop us a note at ryan@iotforall.com and we'll do everything we can to get them as a featured guest. Other than that, thanks again for listening and we'll see you next time.